Hello and welcome. This isn't a happy fun time stream, and you're not getting savings throws. And there's only going to be one card for the show, and it's from this deck. So there you go. I want to tell you about Tuesday, but before we get there, we're going to start here.
If you've ever wondered why there are both peaceful and violent passages in the Quran, if it's ever bothered you that Muslims demand religious tolerance in the West while Christians and Jews can't build churches or synagogues in Saudi Arabia, if you've never quite grasped why organizations like CARE or ISNA claim that Islam is a religion of peace while they support terrorism behind the scenes, welcome to the most important video you'll ever watch. You can't understand Islam in the world today without understanding one essential fact. Jihad proceeds in stages.
And that's the 3 stages we'll be going over today, and I'll work in the part about Tuesday along the way.
Whether you look at the life of Muhammad, or the early Muslim community, or the Quran, or the Hadith, or the Sirah literature, or classical Muslim commentaries, or modern Muslim scholarship, or the spread of Islam in the world today, you will find the exact same pattern. There are 3 stages in the call to jihad, depending on the status of Muslims in a society. And if you understand these 3 stages, you'll understand Islam, 14 centuries of Islamic history, and the situation we're in right now. Stage 1, stealth jihad. When Muslims are completely outnumbered and can't possibly win a physical confrontation with unbelievers, they're commanded to promote peace with non-Muslims and to preach a message of tolerance. For instance, when Muhammad and his followers were a persecuted minority in Mecca, they criticized the beliefs of the polytheists, but they did so peacefully. The revelations Muhammad received during this time proclaimed a future judgment for unbelievers. Allah will one day punish those who reject Muhammad, but in the meantime, to each his own. Goes back to Muhammad. One of the key features of stage 1 is taqiyya, concealing Islam's true intentions in order to protect the Muslim community. This was eventually made explicit in Surah 3:28.
As the Holy Quran tells us,
"Let not the believers take disbelievers for their friends in preference to believers. Whoso doeth that hath no connection with Allah, unless it be that ye but guard yourselves against them," taking, as it were, security. Muslims aren't allowed to be friends with non-Muslims unless they're outnumbered and they feel like they're in danger from a stronger adversary. That's when Muslims are told to pretend to be friendly. One of Islam's greatest scholars, Ibn Kathir, comments, "In this case, such believers are allowed to show friendship outwardly, but never inwardly." Abu Darda, one of Muhammad's companions, put it this way, "We smile in the face of some people, although our hearts curse them."
We're not to Tuesday yet, but stay tuned.
Stage 2, defensive jihad. When there are enough Muslims and resources to defend the Islamic community from attacks, persecution, or criticism, Muslims are called to engage in defensive jihad, fighting unbelievers who pose a physical or intellectual threat to Islam. After the city of Yathrib, now called Medina, agreed to protect the Muslim community, Muhammad and his followers left Mecca, and they were given permission to fight. Surah 22:39-40.
as the Holy Quran tells us,
Permission to fight is given to those upon whom war is made because they are oppressed, and most surely Allah is well able to assist them, those who have been expelled from their homes without a just cause, except that they say, "Our Lord is Allah." Did you catch that? According to the Quran, Muslims were kicked out of Mecca simply because they believed in Allah. We've already seen that the Meccans had no problem with Muslims believing in Allah, or even with Muslims preaching Islam. They had a problem with Muhammad mocking their religion and causing division in their city. But again, Muslims needed victim status for their protection, so I guess Allah decided to fudge history. Don't you dare judge us. The Meccans had been trying to avoid war, but it was clear that the Muslims weren't going to stop attacking the caravans, and that Meccan trade and the livelihood of the city would never be safe. So the pagan tribes sent an army to protect the next caravan. Muslims attacked, and defeated the Meccans at what became known as the Battle of Badr. Notice that the first real battle between Muslims and non-Muslims was a result of non-Muslims trying to protect themselves from Muslims terrorizing their trade routes. Now that Muhammad had several non-Muslim groups ready to defend him, he turned to the primary tactic of stage 2, terrorism. The people of Mecca depended on the caravan trade for their survival. Anyone who had money would invest it, hoping to get back something extra to feed their families. If a caravan was robbed or didn't return, children might starve. So instead of living a peaceful life in Medina, Muhammad started attacking the Meccan caravans. Muslims launched 7 attacks against the caravans, and the Meccans never retaliated. During the 7th attack, Muslims killed a man, and they took the goods and some captives as well. The problem was that it was still the holy month when everyone agreed not to fight. Muhammad was a bit worried about this at first, but then he received Surah 2:17.
As the Holy Quran tells us,
They question thee, O Muhammad, with regard to warfare in the sacred month. Say, warfare therein is a great transgression, but to turn men from the way of Allah, and to disbelieve in Him and in the inviolable place of worship, and to expel His people thence, is a greater transgression with Allah, for persecution is worse than killing.
Almost a Tuesday.
It didn't take long for Muhammad's protectors to realize that they had been duped. Muslims weren't quite the innocent victims they had claimed to be. Muhammad and his followers were far more greedy and violent than the pagans they were now attacking. But these disillusioned defenders soon learned that once you agree to support Muhammad, you don't get to change your mind. Anything other than perfect allegiance to Muhammad becomes grounds for expulsion, seizing property, enslavement, or annihilation. 3 Jewish tribes in Medina found that out the hard way. Non-Muslims also learned that no matter how much they disagreed with Muhammad's campaign of violence and intimidation, they had to keep their mouths shut. Muhammad began ordering the assassination of critics during stage 2. People who spoke out against Islam or wrote poems about Muhammad were brutally murdered. And the citizens of Medina, the very people who had invited Muslims into their city, saw their rights rapidly disappearing in the name of Allah.
Hello. I see the assassins have failed as of October 11th, 2023. Almost a Tuesday.
Stage 2, then, is characterized by defensive fighting those who attack the Muslim community in some way. What we need to get our minds around, however, is that Muslims have a much broader definition of what constitutes an attack than anything we're familiar with. Persecution and military aggression certainly count as attacks, but as we've seen, criticizing Islam counts as an attack. Backing out of alliances after you figure out Muhammad's true intentions counts as an attack. And in the defensive jihad stage, Muslims are ordered to respond to these attacks with physical violence and terrorism.
Now, we've made it to Tuesday. Tuesday was October 3rd, 2023, and I have it on good authority that this guy said this on that day. The focus of this meeting and this week is on the unity of Muslims and the solidarity of Muslims. Well, there's been a lot spoken about the unity of Muslims. We've spoken about it. Others have spoken about it. Everyone has spoken about it. I would just like to raise a brief point about this today. Who is the enemy of unity? Let's focus on this. Who is it that will be harmed by the unity of the Muslims? Let's think about this. The enemies of the unity of the Muslims are those who will suffer if Islamic countries and Islamic states unite. They will not be able to transgress, plunder, or loot other countries. Problems will arise for them. They are the ones who are the enemies of the unity of Muslims. Of course, there are a broad range of Islamic countries, but I will speak about our own limited region now, West Asia and North Africa. If the countries in this region unite, which international power will no longer be able to show aggression, plunder, or interfere in the internal and external affairs of other countries. Which power is that? It's the U.S., of course. If countries such as Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and the Persian Gulf countries adopt a united policy in their fundamental and general affairs, the aggressive powers will not be able to interfere in their internal affairs or in their foreign policy. They are interfering at this point. Today, the U.S. is harming the countries in the region both politically and economically. It's stealing Syria's oil and protecting the cruel, savage, bloodthirsty Daesh in its camps so that it can bring it back out onto the field and unleash it when needed to fight others. This is what they are doing. They interfere in the foreign policies of governments in the region, saying, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. They even interfere in the internal policies of some countries. If we all become united and adopt a united policy, the U.S. cannot do these things. It will not dare to get involved in these matters. This issue must be thought about. The leaders of countries, politicians, and elites, the experts should think about this issue and weigh the benefits. Certainly no country in the world wants a foreign power to interfere in its issues, its politics, or its policies. This is obvious, but nations reluctantly succumb to them. Why? Because they're alone. If countries are united, if governments back each other, and if they come together and work together, they can create a barrier and stand against the interference, intrusion, and plundering of powers like the U.S. This can be done.
Stage 3. Offensive Jihad. When Muslims establish a majority and achieve political power in an area, they are commanded to begin offensive jihad. Once Mecca and Arabia were under Muhammad's control, the message of the Quran changed yet again.
But I was supposed to read this part first. Not that. Sorry, I got lost.
If Muslims have the military strength to expand their political power and to violently subjugate non-Muslim populations, forcing these non-Muslims to pay tribute, the Quran commands them to do so. Surah 9:29.
As the Holy Quran tells us,
Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from among the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So this is the pattern that's been laid down for Muslims by their Prophet. Stage 1, stealth jihad. When Muslims are too weak to fight, they promote peace and tolerance outwardly but never inwardly. They practice taqiyya. They prepare for jihad behind the scenes. They claim victim status and they seek special privileges for Islam. Stage 2, defensive jihad. When Muslims are strong enough to fight but not strong enough to subjugate the unbelievers, they terrorize their enemies, murder critics, and look for excuses to attack other groups. Stage 3, offensive jihad. When Muslims are in the majority, they violently subjugate all non-Muslims, they strive to expand their political dominion, and they rid important Muslim lands of all non-Muslims. This is the pattern we find in the Quran, in the Hadith, and in the Muslim commentaries. It's all right here. If someone can't understand this, I'd say he doesn't want to understand it. But we've reached a point in history when we can no longer afford to be willfully stupid. If our leaders are incapable of grasping the three-step strategy of jihadists, they have no business leading a marching band, let alone a Western nation. Unfortunately, Muslims have been so successful in their Stage 1 operations, they've convinced our leaders and the media that the only information we need when it comes to Islam is what's handed to us by terrorist-linked Muslim organizations like CARE.
And now back to Tuesday. Not only was the part above I read to you spoken Tuesday, but also in that speech was the following. Today, Palestine is the main issue of the Islamic world. Of course, it has been this way for several decades. It is not just true today. For several decades, the issue of Palestine has been, in the true sense of the word, the main issue of the Islamic world. They have forced a people out of its own home, usurped it, and occupied it. Thousands of Palestinians have been killed, tortured, imprisoned, and displaced. This is not a small matter. The main issue of the Islamic world is the issue of Palestine. The firm view of the Islamic Republic is that the governments that are gambling on normalizing relations with the Zionist regime will suffer losses. Defeat awaits them. They are making a mistake. As the Europeans say, they are betting on a losing horse. Today, the situation of the Zionist regime is not the situation that encourages closeness to it. Other governments should not make this mistake. The usurper regime is coming to an end. Today, the Palestinian movement is more alive than it has ever been during these 70 or 80 years. Today, the Palestinian youth and the Palestinian movement, the anti-occupation, anti-oppression, anti-Zionism movement is more energetic, more alive, and more prepared than ever. And you can see this. And God willing, this movement will achieve its goals. The Honorable Imam, may God be pleased with him, described the usurper regime as a cancer. This cancer will definitely be eradicated and at the hands of the Palestinian people and the resistance forces throughout the region. Tuesday. He said it on Tuesday.
It's all right here. Someone can't understand this. I'd say he doesn't want to understand it. But we've reached a